Welcome to ELART Productions A Christmas Carol 2020, brought to you from 17 homes. Please wish us internet luck and we hope that you enjoy the show. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. Old Marley was dead as a doornail.
Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole friend, and his sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event.
Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood years afterwards. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, was Scrooge.
A squeezing,
Wrenching,
Grasping,
clutching,
covetous old sinner.
hard and sharp as flint.
Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, Scrooge sat busy in his counting house.
It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal.
The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day.
The fog came in at every chink and keyhole and was so dense without that the houses opposite were mere phantoms.
The door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep his eye on his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller, it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his room.
Wherefore the clerk tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed.
A Merry Christmas, Uncle!
Came a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation Scrooge had had of his approach.
Humbug.
Christmas? A humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure.
I do. Merry Christmas indeed. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough.
Come then. What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough.
Humbug.
Don't be cross, Uncle.
What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? What's Christmas but a time for paying bills without money, or a time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with a Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart.
Uncle!
Nephew, keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine.
Keep it, but you don't keep it.
Let me leave it alone, then. Much good may it do you, much good has it ever done you.
Christmas is a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable time. And the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of other people as if they really were fellow passengers in life and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good and will do me good. And I say, God bless it.
The clerk in the office involuntarily applauded. Being immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever.
Let me hear another sound from you and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. And you, nephew, you're quite a powerful speaker. I wonder you don't go into Parliament.
Don't be angry, Uncle. Listen, come to Christmas dinner with us tomorrow.
Good afternoon.
I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why can't we be friends?
Good afternoon.
Well, I'm sorry to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been party.
Good afternoon.
I'll keep my Christmas humour to the last. Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Good afternoon.
His nephew left the room without an angry word notwithstanding, and he stopped to bestow season's greetings upon the clerk, who, cold as he was, returned them warmly, saying,
Merry Christmas.
There's another fellow, my clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking about a Merry Christmas. Another lunatic.
This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him.
Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?
Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night.
Ah, well, we've no doubt that his liberality is well represented by his current partner.
Certainly was, for Marley and Scrooge had been kindred spirits.
At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned, shook his head, and handed the credentials back.
Mr. Scrooge, at this festive time of year, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time.
Many thousands are in want of common necessaries, while hundreds of thousands are in want of common comfort, sir.
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
Plenty of prisons, and the workhouses are in full operation, though I wish I could say they were not.
The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigour then?
Both very busy, sir.
Oh, I was afraid from something you said at first, something had occurred to stop them in their useful course.
But, sir, they scarcely furnish Christmas cheer of mind and body to the multitude.
And a few of us are endeavouring, sir, to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and a means of warmth. We choose this time because it's a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices.
What can we put you down for?
Nothing.
You wish to be anonymous?
I wish to be left alone. I don't make myself merry at Christmas and can't afford to make idle people merry. I help support those establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there.
Many can't go there.
And many would rather die.
If they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population.
But
it is not my business.
But
it is enough for a man to understand his own business and not interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon.
Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the charity workers withdrew.
And Scrooge returned his labours with an improved opinion of himself.
The fog and darkness thickened. The ancient tower of a church struck the hours and quarters with tremulous vibrations, as if its teeth were chattering in its frozen head up there. Foggier yet, and colder.
Piercing.
Searching.
Biting.
Cold.
The owner of one scant nose, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But at the first sound of
"Deck the halls with boughs of holly, tra-la-la-la-la, la-la-la-la,"
Scrooge seized a ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror.
Leaving the keyhole to the fog and the frost.
At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and admitted the fact to the expectant clerk, who instantly snuffed his candle out.
You'll want all the day off tomorrow, I suppose.
If it is quite convenient, sir.
It is not convenient, and it's not fair. Yet if I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound.
The clerk smiled faintly.
And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work.
The clerk observed that it was only once a year.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here early the next morning.
The clerk promised that he would, and, in honour of it being Christmas Eve, ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play blind man's buff with his family.
And Scrooge walked out with a growl.
Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers, he went home to bed.
He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building in a yard, and nobody lived in them but Scrooge.
The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands.
Not that he cared a whit for that.
Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it.
Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large.
It is also a fact that Scrooge was a man of little fancy.
Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon.
So, let anyone explain to me how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face.
Marley's face?
Marley's face?
Marley's face. It was not angry or ferocious, though it did have a dismal light about it.
Like a bad lobster in a dark cellar?
Mm-hmm. It looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned upon its ghostly forehead, though its eyes were perfectly motionless. That, and its livid colour, made it horrible. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again.
To say that he was not startled would be untrue, but he put his hand upon the key, turned it sturdily, and walked in.
Humbug.
Scrooge locked his door.
Double locked it.
Which was not his custom.
Quite satisfied and secured against surprise, he sat down beside the fire to take his gruel.
It was a very low fire, and nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close and brood over it before he could extract the least sensation from such a handful of fuel.
His glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room, and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment, and with a strange, inexplicable dread, that, as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house.
This might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun, together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar.
The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door.
It's humbug. I won't believe it.
His color changed, though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes.
I know him. Marley's ghost.
The chain Marley drew was clasped about his middle. It was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses made of steel.
What do you want with me?
Much. In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. You don't believe in me?
I don't.
Why do you doubt your senses?
Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a crown cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than grave about you, whatever you are.
Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel, in his heart, by any means waggish then. The truth is, he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones.
I have but to swallow this, and be for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you! Humbug!
Believe in me.
I do believe, dreadful apparition. Why do you trouble me? Why do spirits walk the earth? Why do they come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit in him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world and witness what it cannot share, but it might have shared on earth.
The spectre shook its chain and wrung its shadowy hands.
You are fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? Or would you know the weight and length of your own strong coil that you bear yourself? It was as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain.
Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing.
Jacob, oh, Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me.
I have none to give. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other kinds of ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is permitted to me. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house in life, and now weary journeys lie before me.
7 years dead, and travelling the whole time?
No rest, no peace, incessant torment of remorse.
But you were always such a good man of business, Jacob.
Business? Mankind was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. At this time of the rolling year, I suffer the most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down?
But...
Hear me! My time is almost gone. I am here tonight to warn you that you yet have a chance and hope of escaping my fate, Ebenezer.
You were always a good friend to me.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Is this the chance you mentioned?
It is.
I think I'd rather not.
Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow, when the bell tolls 1.
Couldn't I take them all at once and get it over with, Jacob?
Expect the second on the next night at the same hour, the third upon the next night, when the last stroke of 12 has ceased.
Marley's ghost beckoned Scrooge towards the window, and Scrooge looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went.
And every one of them wore chains like Marley's.
Some few, they might be the guilty governments, were linked together. None were free.
Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives.
The misery with all of them was, clearly, that they sought to interfere for good in human matters and had lost the power forever.
Now look to see me no more, and for your own sake, remember what has passed between us.
Scrooge examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say, but stopped at the first syllable.
And much in need of repose, went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant.
Deck the halls with boughs of holly, fa la 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 la, la 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 la.
When Scrooge awoke, it was dark. The chimes of a neighbouring church struck the 4 quarters, so he listened for the hour.
12. An hour to 1.
The hour was so long that he was more than once convinced he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously and missed the clock. At length, it broke upon his listening ear with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1.
The hour itself and nothing else. Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who are you? What are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
Your past. Rise and come to me.
It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the hour and the weather were not adapted for pedestrian purposes, that bed was warm and the thermometer a long way below freezing. The spirit was not to be resisted.
They passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day with snow on the ground.
Heavens, I was bred in this place. I was a boy here.
The spirit gazed upon him mildly. He was conscious of 1,000 odours floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts, hopes, joys and cares, long forgotten.
You recollect the way?
Remember it? I could walk it blindfold.
Strange to have forgotten it for so many years. Let us go on.
They walked along the road, Scrooge recognising every gate, post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance. Some shaggy ponies were now seen trotting towards them with boys upon their backs, who called to each other in great spirits.
Scrooge knew and named every one. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted? What was Christmas to him?
Out on Merry Christmas.
These are but shadows of the things that have been. They have no consciousness of us.
They left the high road by a well-remembered lane and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain forms and desks. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire. Scrooge wept to see his poor, forgotten self as he used to be, all alone, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays.
Who comes now?
Fan. My sister, Fan.
I have come to bring you home, dear brother.
Home, little Fan?
Yes, home for good, home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I wasn't afraid to ask him once more if you might come home, and he said yes, you could, and never come back here anymore. And we'll be together for all the Christmas long and have the merriest time in the world.
Your sister was a delicate creature whom a breath might have withered, but she had a large heart.
She had indeed.
She died a woman and had, I think, children?
One child, my nephew, Fred.
They had but that moment left the school behind them, and were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city. It was plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here too was Christmas time. It was evening, and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it.
Know it? I was apprenticed here, apprenticed to old Fezziwig. Why, there he is! Bless his heart! Is Fezziwig alive again? It's the Christmas dance.
Yo, ho there, Ebenezer, Dick.
He always made Dick Wilkins and I clear everything away on Christmas Eve, so we, the workers and Fezziwig's family, could all dance.
No more work tonight, my boys. It's Christmas Eve, Dick Wilkins. Christmas, Ebenezer. Clear away, lads, and let's have lots of room here.
Clear away? There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, with jovial Fezziwig looking on. In came a fiddler and made an orchestra of it.
In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile.
In came all the men and women employed by the business, one after another.
Some shyly.
Some boldly.
Some gracefully.
Some awkwardly.
Some pulling.
Some pushing. In they all
came.
There were dances and forfeits and more dances.
And there's cake.
And a great piece of cold meat.
And a great piece of cold boiled.
And there were mince pies and plenty of beer.
When the clock struck 11, the party broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one either side of the door, shaking hands with each person individually as they left. And thus the many cheerful voices died away, pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig.
A small matter to make these folk so full of gratitude.
Oh, he has the power to render his workers happy or unhappy, to make their service light or burdensome. His power lies in words and looks. in things so slight and insignificant it is impossible to add and count them up. The happiness she gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune.
He felt the spirit's glance and halted.
I should like to be able to say a word to my clerk, Bob, just now.
The scene changed again, and again Scrooge saw himself, this time as a man in his prime of life, with an eager, greedy, restless motion in his eye. He was not alone, but sitting by the side of a fair young girl, in whose eyes there were tears.
Spirit, why do you delight to torture me?
You had a contract with this woman.
When I was a boy.
Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so until we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. But a golden idol has displaced me. You are changed. When our contract was made, you were another man. May you be happy in the life you have chosen.
No more. Show me no more.
But on they went to another scene and place, a room, not large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful girl, so like the last that Scrooge believed it was the same until he saw her, now a comely matron sitting opposite her daughter.
Now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued, and she, with laughing face and plundered dress, was borne towards it, the centre of a flushed and boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who came home laden with Christmas toys and presents. The shouts of wonder and delight with every package was received.
The joy on every face.
And now Scrooge looked on more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at their own fireside. And when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed. Belle's husband spoke.
Belle, I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon, Mr. Scrooge. I passed his office window, and as it was not shut up and he had a candle inside, I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner, Marley, lies on the point of death, I hear. And there he sat, alone. Quite alone in the world, I do believe.
Spirit, remove me from this place.
I told you these were the shadows of things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Remove me, I cannot bear it. Take me back, haunt me no longer.
And he turned to the spirit, in whose face, in some strange way, there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him.
He was conscious of being overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further of being in his own bedroom, where, exhausted, he immediately fell into a heavy sleep.
'Tis the season to be jolly, fa la 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 la.
Awaking in the middle of a prodigiously rough snore, and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1.
1! I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me.
Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple green robe, and it was surrounded by a joyful air. Scrooge spoke to it submissively.
Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Scrooge's room disappeared, and they stood in the city streets on Christmas morning. The house fronts looked black, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth, white sheet of snow upon the roofs, and with the dirtier snow upon the ground. The sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad.
For the people who were shoveling the snow away were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a snowball.
But soon the steeple called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their brightest faces.
On Scrooge and the spirit went until they came to Bob Cratchit's door.
Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence, and she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into a saucepan of potatoes. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in and danced about the table.
What has ever got your precious father then, and your poor brother, Tiny Tim? Oh, here they come, and Martha with them. She wasn't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour.
All together for Christmas Day.
And how did little Tim behave?
As good as gold and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much and thinks the strangest things you've ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him in the church with his iron frame and crutch, because it might be pleasant to them to remember on Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see.
Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty.
Tiny Tim's little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back he came before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his chair beside the fire.
Such a bustle then ensued. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him to a corner at the table. The 2 young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, and at length grace was said, succeeded by a breathless pause as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the goose's breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all around.
There never was such a goose.
And Christmas pudding still to come.
Hello! A great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like washing day. That was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other. That was the pudding.
Oh, wonderful pudding. Your greatest success, my dear, since our marriage.
Why, thank you. I did have some doubts about the quantity of flour.
At last the dinner was all done, and the Cratchit family drew round the hearth, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily.
A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us.
Which all the family re-echoed.
God bless us, everyone,
said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered hand in his, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him.
Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die.
Oh no, kind spirit, say he will be spared.
If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he'd better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, but roused himself speedily on hearing his own name.
Mr. Scrooge. I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
The founder of the feast, indeed. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it.
My dear, the children, Christmas Day.
It should be Christmas Day, I am sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you.
My dear, Christmas Day.
I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's, not for his. Long life to him. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt.
I am the ogre of the family.
And now, without a word of warning, Scrooge and the ghost stood upon a bleak moor.
What place is this?
A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth.
A light shone from the window of a hut, and inside they saw a cheerful company assembled round a glowing fire. An old man and woman with their children and their children's children, and another generation past all that, all singing Christmas songs.
The spirit did not tarry here, but passed on, not to see.
To see!
To Scrooge's horror, looking back, he saw the last of the land, a frightful range of rocks behind them, and his ears were deafened by the thundering of water as it rolled and roared and raged.
Built upon a dismal reef of sunken rocks some league or so from shore, there stood a solitary lighthouse. But even here 2 men had made a fire, and joining their horny hands over the rough table at which they sat, they wished each other Merry Christmas with a can of grog.
And again the ghost sped on above the black and heaving sea until, far away from any shore,
Look! A ship!
They stood beside the helmsman at the wheel, the lookout in the bow, the officers who had the watch, and every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to his companion of some bygone Christmas day. And every man on board had a kinder word for another on that day than on any other day of the year.
It was a surprise to Scrooge, while listening to the moaning of the wind, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room.
He said that Christmas was a humbug, and he believed it too.
More shame for you, Fred.
No, he's a comical fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him.
I've heard he's very rich.
Well, what of that? His wealth is no use to him. He doesn't do any good with it. He doesn't make himself comfortable with it, and I'm sorry for him.
well, I have no patience with him.
But who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Take, for example, today. He won't come and dine with us, and what's the consequence? He loses a nice dinner. and some pleasant moments which could do him no harm. And I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I do pity him. Well, now, a game.
It's a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something and the rest of them had to find out what. Him only answering yes or no. The brisk questioning elicited from him that what he was thinking of.
An animal.
Yes.
Live animal.
A disagreeable animal.
Yes.
A savage animal.
An animal that growled and grunted sometimes. Oh, and it walked sometimes.
Yes.
And lived in London.
And wasn't
A lion.
Or a bull.
Or a bear.
Nope.
At last someone cried out, "I have it, Fred. I know what it was."
Pray, tell.
Why, it's your Uncle Scrooge.
Then the answer to, is it a bear? Or surely to have been, yes.
Well, he has given us much amusement, and it will be ungrateful not to drink his health. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to Uncle Scrooge wherever he is. He wouldn't take it from me, but he may have it nevertheless. Uncle Scrooge.
Uncle
Scrooge.
Uncle Scrooge.
Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have toasted the unconscious company in return if the ghost had given him time. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels.
Much they saw, and far they went. The spirits stood by sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands, and they felt close at home. By struggling men, and they found greater hope. By poverty, and it was rich.
In almshouse, hospital, and jail.
In misery's every refuge.
The spirit left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts.
It was a long night, if it was only a night.
Scrooge had his doubts.
Our time is almost through. My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight.
Tonight?
Tonight at midnight.
The chimes were ringing the 11:15 at that moment.
Forgive me, spirit, if I am not justified in what I ask, but I see something strange, not belonging to yourself, protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?
It might be a claw for all the flesh there is upon it. Look!
They were a boy and girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, kneeling at the feet of the spirit, abject in their humility. Where graceful youth should have filled their features out, a shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing.
Spirit, are they yours?
They are man's. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware them both, and all of their degree. But most of all, beware this boy. For on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased.
Have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
Said the spirit, turning on him for the final time with his own words.
Don we now our gay apparel, fa la 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 la, la 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 la.
Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the bells died away, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes beheld a silent phantom, draped and hooded, coming towards him. Its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread.
Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come?
He said. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand.
You are about to show me the shadows of things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us. Is that so? Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me? The night is waning fast, and so is precious time to me. I know. Lead on, spirit.
They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them and encompass them of its own act. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businesswomen.
I don't know much about it either way. I only know that he's dead.
When did he die?
Last night, I believe. I thought he'd never die.
What's he done with his money?
I haven't heard. Left it to his company, perhaps?
Oh, it's likely to be a very cheap funeral, for upon my life, I don't know of anybody to go to it.
I don't mind going if lunch is provided.
They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, though he recognised its situation and its bad repute. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offences of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth, and with misery.
Far in this den of infamous resort, there was a low-browed beetling shop where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought.
Secrets that few would like to scrutinize were bred and bit hidden in mountains of unseemly rags, masses of corrupted fat, and sepulchres of bones.
In among the wares he dealt in was a rascal, shielding himself from the cold air without by crouching near his charcoal stove.
You couldn't have met in a better place.
Why then, don't stand there staring as if you are afraid, man. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose.
No, indeed.
If he wanted to keep him after he was dead, wicked old screw, well, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after his effects when he was struck with death.
It's the truest word that was ever spoke. It's judgment on him.
Oh, I wish it was a little heavier one. And it should have been, you may depend upon it. If I could have laid my hands on anything else. Come on then, Joe. Tell me what my bundle's worth.
That's your account, and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was to be boiled for not doing it. I always give too much, especially to the ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself.
And now undo my bundle, Joe.
What do you call this? Bed curtains?
Bed curtains.
You don't mean to say you took them down, rings and all, with him lying there?
Yes, I do. Why not?
You were born to make your fortune.
Don't damage those blankets now.
These blankets?
Who else's?
I hope he didn't die of anything catching.
Don't be afraid of that. And it's good quality too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't have been for me.
What do you call wasting of it?
Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure. Better to profit us when he was dead.
Spirit, I see. The case of this unhappy man might well be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?
He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay a something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language.
The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced around it in obedience to a secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man.
Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed towards the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, a motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it, but had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the spectre at his side.
He thought, if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost thoughts?
Avarice, hard-dealing, griping cares.
Oh, they've brought him to a rich end, truly.
He lay in the dark, empty house, with not a man, a woman, or a child to mourn him.
Spirit, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me. Let us go.
Still the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head.
If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, show that person to me, Spirit, I beseech you.
The spirit spread its dark robe before him for a moment like a wing, and withdrawing it, revealed a room by daylight where a mother and her children were.
She was expecting someone, and with anxious eagerness, for she walked up and down the room, started at every sound, looked out of the window, glanced at the clock, tried, but in vain, to work with her needle, and could hardly bear the voices of her children in their play.
At length, the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, though there was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed and which he struggled to repress.
What news? Is it good or bad? Are we quite ruined?
Bad.
And we are quite ruined.
No, there is hope yet, Caroline.
Well, if he relents, there is. Nothing is past hope, if such a thing has happened.
Oh, he's past relenting. He's dead.
Well, to whom will our debt be transferred?
I don't know. But before that time, we shall be ready with the money. Or even if we aren't, it'll be bad fortune indeed to find so merciless a creditor in his successor. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline.
And their hearts were lighter. It was a happier home for this man's death.
Let me see some tenderness connected with a death, Spirit. I beg thee.
The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated in silence around the fire.
It must be near your father's coming home time, though I think he's walked a little slower than he used these last few evenings. He used to walk with Tiny Tim on his shoulder very fast indeed. He was so light to carry, and your father loved him so that it was no trouble. No trouble. Oh, there's your father at the door.
They'll be done long before Sunday.
You went today then, Robert?
Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him I would walk there on a Sunday. My child, my little child. I met Mr. Scrooge's nephew today. He hardly knows me, but seeing I looked a little down as he said, he asked what had happened to distress me, on which I told him, for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you ever heard. I'm heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit, he said, and heartily sorry for your good wife. If I could be of service to you in any way, he said, giving me his card, that's where I live. Pray, come to me. It really seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim and felt with us.
Spectre, something tells me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I don't know how. Tell me what man that was we saw lying dead.
The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him into resorts of businessmen, but showed him, not himself.
Indeed, the spirit did not stay for anything, but went straight on to the end, as now desired, until besought by Scrooge to...
Tarry a minute. This court through which we hurry now is my place of occupation, and it has been for some time. I see the house. Let me behold what I shall be in days to come.
The spirit stopped. The hand was pointed elsewhere.
No, the house is yonder. Why do you point away?
The inexorable finger underwent no change.
Scrooge hastened to the window of his office and looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was not the same, and the figure in the chair was not himself. The phantom pointed as before. Scrooge joined him and, wondering why, accompanied him until they reached an iron gate.
A churchyard. Here then, the wretched man, whose name he'd now come to learn, lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life.
The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Scrooge advanced towards it, trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw new meaning in its solemn shape.
Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that may be only?
Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name. Ebenezer
Scrooge. Am I the man that lay upon that bed?
The finger pointed from the grave to Scrooge and back again.
Oh no, spirit, no! Oh no, no!
Finger was still there.
Spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man that I must have been, but for spiritual intervention. Surely there is hope. Why show me all this if I am past all hope?
For the first time, the hand appeared to shake.
Good spirit, you pity me. Assure me that I may yet change these shadows you have shown me by an altered state.
The kind hand trembled.
Oh, spirit, I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year round. I will live in the past, the present, and the future, and the spirits of all these three shall strive within me. I shall not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone.
In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty. The spirit, though stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, the phantom disappeared, and Scrooge saw an alteration in his surroundings.
Yes, the room was his own.
The bedpost was his own.
Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in.
I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. But I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather, as giddy as a schoolboy. Oh, Jacob Marley be praised. A Merry Christmas to everyone. A Happy New Year to all the world. But I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been amongst the spirits. I don't know anything.
Deck the halls with boughs of holly, tra-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. 'Tis the season to be jolly, fa-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la.
Hello, hello. What's the day, me fine caroller?
Pardon?
What's the day?
Oh, today? Why, it's Christmas Day.
It's Christmas. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. Of course they did. They can do anything. Oh!
Hello?
Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one?
Well, I should hope I do.
Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one.
Why, the one that's half the size of me?
Yes.
Well, it was still there a few minutes ago.
Well, go and buy it for me.
Pardon?
No, I am in earnest. Go and buy it for me and come back in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown. No, I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. He shan't know who sent it. Such a joke. And there's the turkey. Hello, turkey. No one could carry that all the way to Camden Town. Here's your half crown and here's the address and the money for the cab. Go and do it. And now, to go out. It's Christmas Day. My dears, how do you do? Merry Christmas to you.
Mr. Scrooge?
That is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon, and please accept this.
Lord bless me.
Mr. Scrooge, are you serious?
Not a farthing less.
I don't know what to say to such munificence.
Don't say anything, please. And come and see me again.
Oh, we will. And thank you.
Bless you. A Merry Christmas.
Scrooge walked onto the church and walked about the streets, watching the people hurrying to and fro, patting children on the head, questioning beggars, and finding that everything could yield him pleasure.
He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness.
In the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's house.
Fred?
Why, bless my soul, who's that?
It is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner, if you will let me in, Fred.
Let you in? Why, of course.
And it was a wonder he didn't shake his arm off. He was made to feel at home in moments. Nothing could be heartier.
Wonderful party.
Wonderful games.
Wonderful family.
Wonderful happiness.
But next morning, he was early at the office. Very early, hoping to be there first and catch Bob Cratchit late. That was the thing he had set his heart on.
And he did it.
The clock struck 9.
No, Bob.
1:15.
No, Bob.
He was a full 18 minutes
and a
half behind his time.
What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
I am very sorry, sir. I am behind my time.
You are? Yes, I think you are.
It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated.
I am not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I am going to raise your salary.
Pardon, sir?
A Merry Christmas, Bob. A Merry Christmas, my good fellow. And a merrier Christmas than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and I'll endeavour to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas drink. For now, Bob Cratchit, make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you do another thing.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more.
And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father.
He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or as any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world.
Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happens on this globe for good, at which some people do not have their fill of laughter at the outset. His own heart rejoiced, and that was quite good enough for him.
He had no further intercourse with spirits, but ever afterwards it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well.
May that truly be said of us, of all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed,
Everyone.
God bless us, everyone. Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas!